This tutorial will help you to complete the assignments for homework number 7. So the first skill is solve by trinomial factor, and you'll notice it says a equals 1. So that's the leading coefficient is equal to 1. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a quick screenshot of this question, and I'm going to post it here where I can write without having to erase the whole screen. So here's the deal. In order to solve by factoring, you have to have an equation equal to 0. And if you don't, you got to do a little manipulating here before you even begin. So now that I've manipulated my trinomial, I can get started with my factoring. So remember, you create your own diamond pattern by finding the product of A and C and taking the sum of the number in the B position. So I need two numbers that multiply to 27 but add to -12, and you might do some guessing and checking here. And for me, I know that it's -9 and -3. Now, typically I would divide by whatever A is here, but since A is always going to be 1 today, I'm going to skip that step. So our two factors are x minus 9 and x minus 3. Again, since our equation is equal to 0, then we know for a fact that either this factor has to be 0 or that factor has to be 0. And when I use my inverse operations here, I'm going to get my two solutions, which are +9 and +3. So let me show you how you type this into Delta Math. So I'm going to type, what were my answers again? 9 and 3. I'm going to type a 9, and then I'm going to type a comma, and it will open up a new solution box for me. And there we go, in any order. Let's try another one. Again, this needs to be equal to 0, so let's copy this and try a new page. Here we go. So first thing we need to do is move this over. Now remember, when I'm moving it over this time, I'm going to combine it with the 9x that's already there. So if I am subtracting 9x to manipulate, look at this beautiful difference of two squares I get when I'm done, right? So this is a dots, or a difference of two squares. The first number is a perfect square. The second number is also a perfect square. And don't forget, a difference of two squares always has 1 plus and 1 minus. Take the square root of the first term, take the square root of the last term, and then split your two factors up, into two separate questions. Perform your inverse operations either in your head or by writing them out, whichever you prefer, and type your answers into Delta Math. So let's see, we've got a -4, comma, +4, submit. All right, one last time. Okay, let me take a screenshot here, and we'll get started. So I'm noticing right now that it's not equal to 0. So this has to come over, and this has to come over. And in order to manipulate that, I'm going to get a -x for this, and I'm going to get a +3 for that. So I'm going to do both of my steps at the same time. So now I get +3x and -70 equals 0. So get my diamond pattern going here, -70 and 3. I think that's 10 and 7. So I know I've got 10 and 7, but I've got a negative product, so one of those numbers has to be negative. But I've got a positive sum, and the larger number always takes the same sign. So those must be my factors. So x plus 10, x minus 7 equal to 0. Split my factors up, and I'm guessing that most of you can do the inverse step in your head. So -10 and +7 are our factors in any order, but I'm going to go from least to greatest. All right, let's take a look at the second skill, solving quadratics by factoring. Now this means that it could be any type of factoring. It could be a GCF problem. It could be a dots problem. It could be a trinomial. It could be a slide divide bottoms up, right? So first we manipulate, because we need a sentence that is equal to 0. I don't know why I just wrote a 4 there. That's so weird. Oh my goodness, +3x minus 3. +3x minus 3. x squared. Ooh, I like this one. This is a difference of 2 squares. We like dots because they're super simple to set up. They always start like this. And then we square root the first, we square root the last, and we're done. So if I set these each equal to 0, I'm going to get a solution of -2 here and +2 there. So I'm kind of skipping some steps here, but I think you're keeping up. -2 and 2. Let's see what the next problem is. This one's going to be a trinomial, so let's give it a go. And after that, I might skip ahead and see if I can find anything a bit more challenging. Again, it must be equal to 0, so first manipulate. Ooh, this is interesting. Plus 0 equals 0. Look at that. So this actually is not a trinomial when I finish manipulating. And it's not a difference of 2 squares. And it's only thing left would be GCF. So it looks like I can factor out an x, and that's it. Now this is where it's almost so easy it gets hard. So pay attention here. My 2 factors are x and x plus 10. Those are the 2 factors. So either this one is 0 or that one is 0. And this is where it's so easy, it might be hard. But that's done. So the value of 0 is a solution. 0 is a number, and it is a solution. So it looks like our solutions are going to be 0 and -10. This was a GCF problem. So 0, -10. Remember, it can go in any order. And that is right. Okay, this one's going to be a difference of 2 squares. This one's already equal to 0, right? So all you would need to do is write your 2 factors. So +3 and -3. Yeah, all right. This one is a GCF, very similar to what I just did with you before. So when you're factoring this, you pull out the x. You're left with x plus 6. Again, split your factors. Either x is 0 or x plus 6 is equal to 0. And then you can write those 2 values in, 0 and -6. 0 and -6. All right, let's try the third skill. Solving quadratics with roots. Level 1. All right, let me take a screenshot of this. This one's going to need some explaining, so here we go. Okay. So in this problem, you have a parentheses with a square sign. And the trick is we need to get it by itself. And all the other numbers can be over here. But we want to get this by itself. It's okay if there's a sentence in here. But we want the parentheses in the square to be the only quantity on that side. So first I'm going to add 31 to both sides. Okay. And now I'm going to get rid of this coefficient. Is that right? Did I do that right? 36, 19? I need a calculator. 45 plus 31? 45 plus 31? 76 divided by 4? Okay. All right. All right, I was double checking myself because this next step is where it starts to get a little confusing. Now, you cannot subtract 1 because it is a part of a quantity. But what you can do is eliminate a square. And you do that by square rooting both sides. And this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky, so pay attention. A square and a square root cancel out. And that leaves us with just x plus 1. Now over here, the square root of 19 is not so pretty. So if you do it on your calculator and you get a wicked crazy decimal, we're not really interested in that. So what we're going to do is when you can't do the math, meaning when it doesn't come out to be an integer, we leave the math. So if you can't do the math, leave the math. But this part is important. A square root, like let's talk about one you know. A square root has positive roots and negative roots. A square root has positive roots and negative roots. So even though 19 is not a perfect square, it does have a positive root and a negative root. So this is how we're going to write our answer. x plus 1 is equal to the square root of plus or minus 19. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 1 from the left side. I'm going to bring it over to the right side, but I'm not actually going to do any math. I'm just going to write those numbers side by side. So watch what I get here. I get negative 1 plus the square root of 19 or negative 1 minus the square root of 19. And that is how I'm going to write my answer. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 19. Now that's pretty crazy. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 19. Let's see how we would type that here. Negative 1, now you see why these buttons are down here, plus or minus, square root sign, 19. Yes, we did it. Right? See this step here? They moved the 31, they divided by 4, they got rid of the square by square rooting, and since 19 is not a pretty number, we leave it in square root form. This is called writing in simplest form. All right, let's try another problem. I know that was kind of crazy. Let's try another one. All right, let's get a new page going. All right, let's get x by itself. Here's another thing that's kind of tricky for kids. You can't square root unless you have a positive value. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of that negative, right? So I'm dividing by a negative 1. And now I can take the square root, right? Because negative divided by negative is positive. And I have, well, it's okay over here because I don't have a negative sign anymore. So the square root, now this one is sometimes tricky because kids don't think 1 is a perfect square, but it is. Square root and the square cancel each other out. But there are 2 answers always. So every time you're square rooting both sides, the next thing you should write is this plus or minus sign. And the square root of 1 is 1. So when you type your answer, if you forget to write this plus or minus sign, you're going to be wrong. So let's try one more. Here we go. Let me take a quick pic of this. Okay. And let's go. All right, we need to eliminate everything except that. So we need to remove this plus 33. And then on the next step, we are going to divide by 5. And then on the next step, we're going to clear our square. And then I always start like that. Okay, I always start like that. Now 7 is not a perfect square, so I leave it in square root form, and then I subtract 5 from both sides. And remember, if you can't do the math, because you can't, you leave the math. So leave that integer right in front of the plus or minus sign. So the answer is negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 7. So negative 5 plus or minus square root 7. Awesome. All right, the fourth topic, completing the square. So this one was new this week for us, as well as that last one. And when we complete the square, remember we move the c term to the other side. And then we leave this big space here where we are going to put some information, right? So we're going to, let me write that a little closer. We leave a big space here because we want to put something on both sides. And what we want to put is a perfect square number. And you can pick any number you want, but we're specifically picking a value that has a relationship to b, because we want an answer that is a repeat. Right? If you had something like this, that's a repeat. We're looking for answers that are repeats. So how we do that is we take half of b and then we square it. So half of b, so this is the formula, and b is negative 2. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1, and negative 1 squared is positive 1. So that is the perfect square that I'm going to be adding to both sides of my equation. Be careful here because that's fair. You can add anything you want as long as you're adding it to both sides. Now the reason why I added this number is because this, when I factor this trinomial, is always going to be a repeat factor. Always going to be a repeat factor. And I know that, so if I want, I can even skip over the whole diamond pattern if I want, but I don't have to. I know that because I specifically chose this number plus 1, so I can just square root it. So I'm going to have the same sign as what's in the middle of both of my factors, and then the square root of this in both of my factors. By doing that, I actually will now get a repeat factor, right? That's the whole point. This is called completing the square. So now I have a square on the left side, which we just practiced in the last activity. So I square root both sides. I get x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2. Ooh, that's a beautiful answer this time. Add 1 to both sides. So my answer is 1 plus or minus 2. Now, because there's no square root sign here, I can do this math. So 1 plus 2 is 3, and 1 minus 2 is negative 1. So that's how I get my answers. You might need to pause the video and watch that part again. 3 and negative 1. 3 and negative 1. All right, let's try that completing the square again. All right, let's try that one more time. Solve the equation for x by completing the square. So this time, I have to get c to the other side, but I have to get this b term to the left. So I'm going to subtract 12x from both sides. And now I'm going to subtract 32 from both sides. And when I do that, I deliberately leave this big empty space here because I want to complete the square. And you do that by taking half of b and squaring it. So for us, half of b, which is negative 12, is negative 6, and negative 6 squared is positive 36. So I add 36, don't forget, to both sides. And when I do that, over here, I'm going to get positive 4. And over here, I'm going to get a double factor. And here's the shortcut. Steal the sign from the middle, square root the first, square root the last. Square root the first, square root the last. That's why you complete the square. Square root both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus sign. And then get x by itself. So 6 plus or minus 2 is 8 and 4. X is equal to 8 or 4. 8 comma 4. All right, last skill. Complete the square irrational. Now this is when you take half of b and square it, and the number's not so pretty. The number's not so pretty. So here we go. It's already equal to 0, so I just have to move c to the other side. X squared plus 14x plus big empty space equals negative 30. All right, here we go. Half of b squared. And b is 14. And when we square it, we get 7 squared, which is 49. So I'm going to add 49 to both sides. The point of doing that is to get a repeat and a perfect square factor. Ooh, 19. But we already know we've done this before. Again, steal the sign from the middle. Plus stays a plus. Square root the first, square root the last. Now, square root both sides to start solving. X plus 7 is equal to plus or minus 19. And subtract 7. Oops, got my square root sign. I forgot to write square root of 19. And there we go. Negative 7 plus or minus square root of 19, which should look familiar to you. We've done problems like this before. But they just started in this form. And now we're adding the factor step. All right, so negative 7 plus or minus 19. Negative 7 plus or I keep forgetting to say the word square root. Negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 19. Yes. All right, you see, need to see one more. This will be my last one. I don't think you need it, but I'll show you one more. Okay. Bring him to the left, bring him to the right. Leave a big empty space. Take half of b and square it. Half of 2 is 1. Add that to both sides. We always start like this. Steal the sign from the middle. Square root the first. Square root the last. Square root both sides. Plus or minus the square root of 11. Add 1, add 1. X is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 11. Ooh, I was fast. But you could always pause and rewind the video. 1 plus or minus the square root of 11. All right, that's it. That concludes homework number 7. Good luck.